this Trump administration in a huge blow to the White House and its agenda.
We've got some breaking news just now on the central economic policy of this Trump administration, in a huge blow to the White House and its agenda, and a big win, I would say, for everyone else. A federal appeals court has just ruled that Trump's wide tariffs are unlawful and invalid. Of course, the president has been obsessed with imposing his random tariffs on Americans. In fact, it has been the central plank of his entire economic agenda. Now it has been wildly unpopular. It's polling underwater. It is costing consumers and corporations billions and billions of dollars by the day. It's stopping the Fed from cutting interest rates by driving inflation. It has on the whole been really bad economic policy, and most of the discussion of these tariffs has been focused on that. But there's also something about these tariffs, which is that from the start, they've been pretty clearly illegal. I mean, think about it for a second. Can the president just by himself create tariffs that raise hundreds of billions of dollars with zero congressional input? These tariffs are a violation of the law that they use as the reason and a violation of the spirit of the Constitution, of a country which was quite literally founded on the belief the executive cannot on his own just impose a tax without representation, specifically tariffs. Now the Trump administration has claimed that its tariff system and the reciprocal tariffs that it has, and those on China and Mexico and Canada, that those are an emergency measure under a 1974 law, and that made it legal. Well, when this was challenged in a district court, the district court judge said, "No way, this does not fit with the law." So the Department of Justice, acting as Trump's lawyers, appealed. And now, just 20 minutes ago, in a huge development, an appellate court has just upheld that ruling, 7-4, the federal appellate circuit saying it is illegal. All the tariffs are illegal. The emergency you claim is not a valid reason to break the law. Neil Katyal argued this case on behalf of the plaintiffs who just emerged victorious. He previously served as acting Solicitor General of the United States, and he joins me now. Neil framed the argument that you made, and what the court said about those arguments. Yeah, so I want to begin by saying, like you started by saying, it's a blow to the President Trump. The way I really think of it is, it's a win for the Constitution, and it's always, a very serious, careful thing when you challenge presidential action, and something you have to do really carefully. But when we looked at this, and I'm privileged to represent a number of small businesses, we looked at it and said, look, this just is way beyond the constitutional line. And that's what the 7 judges today said on our nation's second highest court. They looked at it and said, the president under our Constitution is given no power to impose tariffs. Our founders clearly gave that to the Congress in Article 1, Section 8. President Trump himself recognized that last time when he was president. He went and asked Congress for the authority to tariff, and they said no. So President Trump this time around just did it on his own. And what we said is you can't do that under the laws and Constitution of the United States. And that's what I'm glad to see the court confirm today. Yeah, I thought this was an interesting phrasing. This is the Federal Circuit, which is an interesting and unique appellate circuit that deals with certain jurisdictions, including in international trade. They talk about the 5 executive orders that impose tariffs of unlimited duration on nearly all goods from nearly every country in the world. Which I thought was, when you put it like that, you think to yourself, yeah, that does seem like a pretty broad claim of executive authority. Yeah, as broad as it could get. And I think this is one thing that the judges were concerned about, and certainly we've been thinking about, which is the Trump administration is saying they want to bring this case to the Supreme Court. And this U.S. Supreme Court for many years has been saying, in particular with respect to a lot of different presidential actions of President Biden's, these questions are too major for the president alone to decide. They have to be done by the Congress. And here you got something as major as it gets. That nonpartisan tax foundation says that these tariffs are the largest tax increase on Americans since Bill Clinton in 1993. And yet Congress had nothing to do with them. It's just President Trump and the stroke of his pen, and that just can't be the right way to run a constitutional system. It's been interesting to cover this as we have because so much has focused on the concrete effects. I mean, right now, if you're buying coffee, for instance, you notice that coffee has gotten very expensive. We don't grow a lot of coffee in the US, there's a little bit in Hawaii, but we import a huge amount of coffee. That coffee is being tariffed, so there's all sorts of effects. But the debate didn't really talk about the legal foundation. The argument that they're making is that there's a 1974 act that allows them to declare an emergency under which they can impose these tariffs. But what's interesting about that act is it doesn't use the word tariff at all. It's entirely about sanctions on countries that we have some political adversarial relationship with. Right? You're exactly right, Chris. You're doing excellent lawyering. I suspect it's in part due to your spouse, who's an amazing lawyer in her own right. But that's exactly right. The government is saying in this case, the Trump administration is saying that in 1977, Congress passed a law that gave the president emergency economic powers. And the court today said, yeah, that's true. There's only one problem with that. That 1977 law says nothing whatsoever about tariffs. No president in the 50 years since that law was passed thought it had to do with tariffs. And as I said a moment ago, even Donald Trump didn't think it had to do with tariffs. Because the first time around when he was president, he went to Congress to try and get the tariff authority that he's now claiming. And Congress said no. And I suspect you know he's worried Congress would say no if he asks again for all the reasons that you were explaining earlier. You know, one of the things here, and I want to read again from this decision here, this is the sort of core of the holding. For the reasons discussed above, we find no clear congressional authorization by IEEPA, that's the 1977 law, for tariffs, of the size of the reciprocal tariffs and the trafficking tariffs. Reading the phrase, regulate importation, which is the legal language they're citing, to include imposing these tariffs is a wafer-thin reed on which to rest such sweeping power. How confident were you about winning this case? I mean, you obviously had the lower court on your side, but also courts have been fairly respectful to presidential declarations of emergency powers. Yeah, no, when you're challenging presidential action, if you're the president facing these challenges, you almost have to try to lose the case. It's like failing kindergarten. You gotta try. But I think that's unfortunately where we were here. And that's why, you know, I'm privileged not just to represent this myself, but with a whole group of very conservative folks. The Liberty Justice Center is the group behind this libertarian organization. Judge Michael McConnell, other very prominent former conservative, former judge, very conservative. You know, it's not, this is, you know, when you get to something like this, Chris, the Constitution is not political. It's a bipartisan document that speaks to all of us, and it sets certain ground rules, and one of those ground rules was enforced today. The idea that the president on his own can't tax the American people. That's what King George III tried to do. We had a revolution about that. Yeah, final question for you. I think this is probably, we're not at the Supreme Court yet, but probably the most significant ruling in stopping claims of power from this president since what happened with Comer Garcia, which, you know, did go up to the Supreme Court. The big question is, how confident are you? The Supreme Court's almost certainly going to take this up. How confident are you there? So I'm very confident in the strength of our argument, Chris. I think it is rock solid, extremely strong, and I know that there's sometimes some in the public who say, well, this is a court that's dominated by Republican appointees and the like, and you can never get a, you know, liberal victory or something. And I have two things to say to that. Number one, this isn't a liberal victory. This is a victory for the rule of law that conservatives and liberals should celebrate alike. And number two, the court has shown time and again that it can reach conclusions that are at odds with conservative ideas when the law says so. And you know, when I argued Moore versus Harper, and we talked about that a couple of years ago, is a good example, so I think let's let the process play out. Our hope is that the administration doesn't appeal this, that they go to Congress and ask for the authority that the court says that's what the Constitution says they should be doing. But if they do decide to appeal it, we will be ready at the U.S. Supreme Court for them. Stephen Miller just posting. On social media, the judicial coup is out of control. Those are his words. Presumably, in response to this, Neil, thank you so.